And we'll talk about the kind of technology, the standards, and the normal attacks people use against wireless networks. So, as we know, everything is wireless. This has been true for quite a while. Now it's getting much more explosive with smart meters and with the enormous Internet of Things explosion, where many, many things are in your house, your burglar alarm and all these other things, and some of them connect with wires out of the house, and some of them use various wireless standards. I was just reading about a new wireless standard the other day. The one I heard before was Zigbee, which I played with a bit, which is relatively short range and makes a mesh network, and it's used for the power meters. And it works in areas where you have dense populations, so the power meters are pretty thick. But there's another one called low power network, where you only send something like 1,000 bits a day. It's so low power that your battery will last for 2 years, and it sends wireless signals up to 2 miles, which sounds pretty exciting for things like that. It's in the news, I forget the acronym for it. But anyway, there's a lot of everything that's pretty much wireless out there. But the particular kind of wireless we're talking about here is classical wireless data transfer, the kind you get to the computers. That's our main focus, although all those other protocols are also increasingly important with the Internet of Things. So in this case, you have an access point someplace which has got an antenna to convert a wired computer network signal to a wireless signal, so it's connected with Ethernet cable to the Internet, and then offers wireless for line of sight. It's what radio people call line of sight. The rated maximum distance is 100 meters. In fact, inside buildings, because of the metal in the walls and floors, it typically only goes for 1 or 2 rooms before the signal gets too small. Anyway, that's the point here. So now you have a wireless local area network, the things in 1 or 2 rooms connected to this, and then it connects to the wide area network through cables. So the access point is where you configure channels, which is a big problem in the older generations of wireless technology, because there are not enough channels in America. Since you do not have enough channels for every access point to use its own channel, you have a situation where every device in the room is picking up all the signals from all the other devices in the room, just like the sound in this room. If everybody talked at once, there'd just be noise all over the place. So in order to tell which signal to listen to, you have a service set identifier which identifies every frame sent at layer 2. And so your computer hears dozens of packets, and it looks at the SSID in the package to decide whether the packet is actually part of your network or not. And that's an alphabetic name that you can see. That's what you see when you look at the list of networks, Cisco, Linksys, Belkin, and so on. And that is always sent in plain text in every frame, so there is no possible way to hide this. There are a lot of very foolish wireless security measures recommended, and one of them is to block the beacon frames so that your network will not announce its presence, and when people boot up a computer and look for it, they won't see it. And this does have the effect of preventing casual people from connecting to your network, but it isn't going to stop anybody that is sophisticated enough to run Wireshark, because if the network is in use, there are a bunch of packets flying around, and each one of them has the SSID in plain text, so you can detect it quite easily. But it will stop some attackers, so if you're tired of like your neighbors downloading movies on your connection, blocking the beacon frames might possibly stop them if they're very unsophisticated. However, it has a cost. If you have a single wireless access point at your home, then there's no particular need for the beacon frame. It's a minor annoyance when you first connect. But if you're at a wide area network like the college, we have hundreds of antennas all over the campus, all with the same SSID. So if you start downloading a file and you pick up your laptop and walk down the hallway, your computer will watch the beacon frames get weaker, and the beacon frames from the other access point get stronger, and it will hand off from one access point to the next so you can continue your download. The same way your cell phone does. If you move while making a phone call, it will connect to one tower and then notice when it's time to connect to the next tower without breaking your call. And you can only do that if you have beacon frames. If you turn off beacon frames, you mess up roaming. There's no way for your computer to know that it should let go of the one that's moving away and connect to the next one. Another unintended consequence of that technology is the evil twin attack. All you have to do if you want to steal data from some other student on the college network is boot up a computer and turn on an access point that pretends to be named CCSF Wireless and then turn up the power until your power is stronger than the power from the real access point, and everyone's computer will think the user has picked it up and moved down the hallway, so this one's gotten weaker and that one's now the stronger. It will silently connect to the stronger signal, and unfortunately, it will not test the security level. So you can take our WPA encrypted network and silently replace it with an unencrypted network, and your computer will just connect to the unencrypted network and continue running. So you can go to a coffee house, turn on your laptop, put yourself in the middle, lower everyone's security to 0, steal their traffic, and then turn it off, and they will connect back to the coffee house and continue their session. They never know this has happened. There's no log entry, and that's one of the really scary attacks. This is what was so scary about Heartbleed. Heartbleed let you steal random chunks of data from HTTPS servers for 2 years before anybody figured it out. And when they did, everybody had to go to their boss and say, everyone could have been stealing all the data off our server, including all the private keys and passwords for the last 2 years, and we will never know whether that happened because none of it would appear in the logs. This is really bad for high-level management that has to make statements to lawyers and obey compliance rules, and they say, did you protect the data? And you have to say, I really have no idea whether we protected the data or not, and I never will know. That's a very unsatisfactory answer to give the people that have trusted you with their data. Anyway, that's why if I had a high security company, I would probably remove the wireless cards from the laptops I give them and say, you just have to do everything through the phone network, 3G, 4G, and 5G, because it is much safer. It's always encrypted, and it's not a shared network. So people sitting next to you in a coffee house cannot intercept it easily. The only people that can intercept it are people who build rogue femtocells and stingrays, like police, and it's not impossible to do that, but it's an order of magnitude more difficult than Wi-Fi hacking, which almost anybody can do with just a Linux box. Anyway, so when you buy your router, these things are actually called access points, but most of the devices people buy at home are combination devices, a router, switch, a firewall, and an access point in one box, and they just call it a router, which confuses a lot of beginning students, because technically a router is just one of the several devices in that box. But anyway, they come with the default SSID, and it's considered a good idea to change that, not only so that you can identify which one to connect to, but also because you do not want to advertise the brand of your router too publicly, because there are specific attacks against each router brand, although it is a very thin defense because the MAC address in your access points identifies the manufacturer just as well. But it's another step to figure that out. So here's some example default SSIDs of different devices. So your access point has a configuration page, which is unfortunately not standard. Each manufacturer just writes their own. They always have about the same options because all the chips inside wireless devices are made by about 3 companies, and they're all the same. The 100 brands of wireless devices are pretty much just a fraud. Like if you go to the Safeway, there are 100 brands of painkillers, but there are only 3 legal painkillers in the world. There's acetaminophen, ibuprofen, and aspirin. And they're all the same 3 ingredients in those 100 different brands of painkiller. It's completely nonsense that there are so many different brands. There's no real meaningful difference between them. And the same thing's true of your other devices. The only difference is the quality of manufacturer and the size of the power supply and things like that. The actual chips inside there are pretty much all the same, so each manufacturer has a different graphical environment to make the 10 or so adjustments you can make on the chip. So that's what the D-Link configuration page looks like. You go to the default gateway of the wireless network, and you'll perhaps log in through some system which tends to be very insecure, and then you have a few choices. You can choose whether to encrypt your stuff with WEP or WPA. You can specify a key if you choose an encrypted protocol, change the SSID, and so on. A few simple adjustments. Yeah?
Previously you said to be mimicking CCSF SSID.
Yeah, that's the evil twin attack.
How do you turn up the power?
You have to buy, you can adjust the power. And by the way, if you, most access points are limited to very low power by law, so if you replace the firmware with Linux, like OpenWRT, you can push the power up beyond the legal limit. And a lot of people do that so they can get more signal at home. And you can actually burn them up that way. But anyway, if you have enough cooling, that's one option. But if you have an antenna on your own computer, you can push it up with software up to the limit of the power supply of your computer. And many of these attackers are probably violating radio power laws in order to do that. which is, you know, something that happens all the time and you're not going to get caught very easily. Like in Berkeley, there's a bunch of pirate radio stations. I knew a guy that used to run one. You can just put up, he would just drive around on a bicycle, put an antenna in a tree and broadcast pirate radio for like an hour from the park. And if you're near the park, he'll ride right on top of some other signal that somebody else is supposed to have. And as long as you don't stay in one place too long, the cops don't catch you and stuff, you know. This is a similar thing. You can run a high power radio for a while. You really get away with it until your neighbors complain. There aren't any Wi-Fi police driving around sniffing for high power signals, but there could be. So anyway, here's where you can disable the SSID broadcast, like I said, and some people might find that a desirable security measure. I think for most people, this will just be more bother than it's worth, because it means your access point will not show up on the list, like the list I have up here. Here's the list of all the networks around here, which because we're on campus is much less than you go to a coffee house, you'll see about 50. And they're all sharing the same spectrum. And if you turn off the broadcast, you won't appear on this list. Someone can still get there by clicking join other network and then typing in the SSID, but that will stop casual people from connecting easily to your network. So everybody has to have a wireless network card to join the game. Almost every device that is capable has built-in cards now, laptops and cell phones and tablets and everything. You can add wireless NICs to your computer if you have the ability to add PCI cards. Some of them connect through USB. And this is something you might want to do if you want to hack into wireless networks, because most NICs have turned off the features that let you hack into networks. There's only about 10% of network cards that are sold have a easy way to get at the features you need to crack into web networks. And I used to do this in homework here, but I gave it up because web is essentially extinct in San Francisco. It's really kind of a historical interest. Anyway, when technology is new, one manufacturer, Cisco does this a lot. Cisco often invents a new feature and they manufacture some product with an exciting new feature, and the only way to get it is to buy all Cisco equipment because it's a proprietary technology. But if it is successful, then they try to make it a standard, and then you can have some kind of alphabetic code for it, and then you can stamp on the box all these devices obey the standard, and different manufacturers' devices can now play nice together. Like you can buy anything you want, you can plug it in the wall with that 3-prong plug because they're all the same. That's a standard, and so is Ethernet. So the IEEE is the committee that comes in after manufacturers have invented something new and it's becoming popular to define a standard. And after they define a standard, then everybody has to do it that way. So the manufacturers send a lot of representatives to these committees and try to push for their version to be made standard. And everybody else will have to throw away their old stuff and make new stuff to match my way. But somebody eventually wins. And so there's a whole series of groups that these things pass through before they get the official stamp of an IEEE number, and that defines the standard, which will generally win in the marketplace, although there are a few cases where this system failed spectacularly, especially in the wireless world, which we'll get to. So 802 was the original networking long ago. 802.3 was Ethernet, which became a big hit. There are a lot of others that came and went. 802.11 was the wireless network. And the original 802.11 alone was a really slow old wireless network that's not used anymore. But one of the things it handled was a fundamental problem with wireless. Customers were reluctant to switch to wireless networks because even with no technical training at all, any fool can tell that if you connect through a cable, the only people that get the signal are the people at the other end of that cable. But wireless means the data is just flying everywhere, and that's got to be less safe. And indeed it is, and everybody could see that. And in particular, it means in a cable, in wired Ethernet. Now let me just turn on the lights to draw a little figure out here. In wired Ethernet, you can the voltage goes all the way to the other end of the cable. So you have a cable here, and then you might have something like a hub or a switch, and then another device over here. So you have a computer. These things can be up to 100 meters apart. So when you start sending, there's a voltage here. It goes, say, +5 and 0, although it's a little more complicated than that. You got a pattern of voltage coming here, and the voltage stays at pretty much full size all the way to the other end of the network. So what happens is, if signals are supposed to go from, say, 0 to 5, if two devices transmit at the same time, it will have the effect of going up here to like 6 or 10 when they collide. So it's very easy to detect collisions. There is an allowed range of voltages, and if you get a voltage outside the allowed range, that means there's been a collision. That's how the devices detect it. Then they send a jamming signal and say, everybody shut up, we've got a problem, and you resend those packets because you know they were destroyed. But in a wireless network, if I have an access point up here, and a computer down here with a wireless card, it falls with the square root. So it starts with big voltage and it falls and falls and falls and falls and falls. So you have absolutely no idea how big the voltage could be. If you're near this, it might be 5 volts. If you're 100 yards away, it might be 0.05 volts. And in both cases, it's a perfectly valid signal. So there is no way to detect a collision. There is no forbidden voltage range. So you cannot use the Ethernet system of detecting collisions and then resending the package. You have to avoid collisions with this new other system, CSMA-CA. And the way this works is before you talk, you have to say, I'm about to talk. Everybody shut up. Then you pause, then you talk. Then the person that received it has to reply saying, did you get it? Okay, now the next person can talk. And all the devices in the room, only one of them can send a packet at a time. So it is much, much slower than a wired network. When people, in 802.11n came out, and people thought they could get 300 megabits per second on a wireless network, a bunch of very stupid technical writers wrote, this will be the end of Ethernet, because Ethernet runs at 100, and now wireless will run at 300. But if you use switches like we do, and you wire these up with 100, every one of these computers has 100 megabits per second of usable bandwidth. If you put up an 802.11n network, and people connect, we now have 300 megabits per second for everyone to share total, and only one person can talk at a time. And when wireless networks get up to about half of the bandwidth being used, there are so many collisions slowing everything down that it's very inefficient. So, you know, the number, you're lucky if you ever get even half of the actual data transmitted per second as that number on how fast your wireless network is. Half the bandwidth is wasted by machines arguing about who's going to talk next and did you get it, I better resend it and all that. It's fantastically complicated and inefficient, but of course the convenience of not having to plug in when you travel around is worth it. Anyway, so you don't have an address associated with a physical station since you're connecting to portable devices, so you call the addressable unit a station, and here's the basic architecture. You have an access point, and you have some devices connected to that access point, typically in the same room, and they call that a basic service set. And then, if you have a larger network like City College, you'll have a series of access points going around your campus, and you have a series of basic service sets with a distribution system in the middle, making them into a larger network. Unfortunately, the frequency range for the most popular kind of wireless, 2.4 gigahertz, is not only used by almost all consumer devices, like baby monitors and everything, so it's full of noise. It's also using not enough channels. There are only channels up to 11, from 1 to 11 allowed in America, and they're so wide that they overlap greatly. So there are actually only 3 non-overlapping channels. I think 6 and 11 are the ones everyone uses. So it is really pretty ridiculous. If you go to a coffee house, there are like 20 or 30 networks going on at the same time on the same channel. And it is not surprising that frequently you can't connect even when you should be able to. Infrared is another option. The problem with infrared is it does not go around corners. The way you actually have the devices pointing to each other. But it's another way to move data pretty fast. The chips are easy and cheap, easy to use and cheap. Anyway, so the first one was 802.11a, created in 1999. This never became very popular. It was relatively short range, relatively fast, and not very popular. The one that really hit the market was 802.11b. This was slower and ran at 2.4 gigahertz, but it went a longer range, and the throughput was supposedly 11 megabits per second. Like I say, you're lucky to get even half of that. More likely, 10% of that is what you'll actually get in practice. But this is a time when most people had 56K dial-up modems, and DSL ran at about twice that, and even a small fraction of 11 megabits per second was all the bandwidth you really needed, and that was a hit. Now, as I said, even untechnical consumers could readily tell that this technology is obviously unsafe. My signals are going all over the place, everybody can eavesdrop on them. That can't be good. So in order to improve the sales of the devices, they invented this garbage called wired equivalent privacy, called WEP, and told customers that you would be as safe because of WEP as you were on a wired network. I don't think the protocol lasted even 1 year before everybody found massive flaws in it and started hacking it. And it turned out to be one of the many disgraces in security, like DES. The data encryption standard is another one. There have been many, many security features rolled out that were rapidly proven to be terrible and caused a whole bunch of people to lose data. This is the largest breach in history, and I think 2004 was from a guy who cracked into web networks and stole credit card numbers off it, and then he turned into an FBI informant. They let him out of jail, and while an FBI informant, he committed the newest largest breach in history with the same technique. First he stole 50 million, then he stole 100 million more credit card numbers, and ended up in prison all alone because now the FBI hates him and all the hackers in the world hate him. Their web-enabled networks were allowed by Visa and MasterCard to handle credit cards in America officially until the end of 2010, 10 years after everyone totally knew how to hack it. And at that time, if you still wanted to keep on using WEP, which many large retailers did, all you had to do was fill out a form saying it would be too much bother for us to upgrade our WEP equipment from more than 10 years ago, so please extend us for another year or two. So with their blessing, you could continue to send credit card numbers this way at least until the end of 2012, and it would be sort of interesting to know how many people are still doing it, because it means they bought their wireless equipment 15 years ago and they refused to upgrade it. Anyway, that's the political side of it, which is always the problem. And it's business side too. I mean, the fact is they might have spent $1 million on wireless equipment that's still working, and they don't understand why they should have to upgrade just for the safety of the customers. Anyway, 802.11e was supposed to handle interference, and 802.11g eventually came out, which was faster and became quite popular to move from 11 megabits per second up to 54 megabits per second, again in the 2.4 gigahertz range. So the problem of interference with other devices was not fixed. 802.11i finally introduced WPA. Now you can tell this is not an acronym that the IEEE approved, because this is the kind of thing that academic people will not let you do. I can tell you this when I run course outlines through committees here. We technical people write a course, but the committees are full of English majors, and they're always mad at technical people for abusing English. And one thing they will not let you do is take an acronym and then make another acronym of the first acronym. So Wi-Fi is an acronym, and then you say Wi-Fi protected access. That's annoying. But that's because the IEEE was in a jam and they could not decide how to fix WEP for like 9 years. But the customers had figured out that WEP was no good, so there was significant pressure to market devices that were safer than WEP even when there was no standard available. So manufacturers took the risk and invented their own proprietary protocol, called it WPA, and sold it. And this went on for years before the IEEE finally got their act together to come and officially bless it as a standard protocol. But then WEP, WPA was a hastily conceived protocol to fix the disaster of WEP. The WEP had 4 security weaknesses, and WPA put small corrections on those 4 problems just to stop the WEP cracking tools that existed at the time. And the belief of most security experts was that WPA would only last for a couple of years before some other problem was found, but that turned out to not be true. The reason why they did it that way was because WPA was intended to be a software upgrade only that you could put on hardware that was designed for WEP, that would make a small correction in WEP so it was safer without making everyone buy new hardware. And then later on they approved WPA2, which actually upgraded all the encryption to modern levels and would require a faster processor and new router altogether. But WPA was never cracked. People found various small problems with it, but nothing that really mattered. And if you use just WPA, the first version, it's still perfectly fine. Nobody's getting in there without your password. Yeah?
Why, when you are so let's say you're adding a wireless access point to an existing network, right, and you're cascading it, right?
Yeah.
Why can you only use WPA encryption and you can't use WPA2?
The only reason why they wouldn't offer WPA2 is that your hardware can't handle it, which means your hardware is really old. Anything less than about 8 years old, it now has WPA2. And they often don't even offer WEP anymore.
Okay.
Yeah. But there are also some devices still for sale that are WEP only. My landlord had a radio that way, and so you either have to connect with a wire or use WEP. It doesn't have WPA ability.
For example, in DDWRT, if you're going to set up a cascaded router, you can choose WPA2 or whatever as your security standard, but the second that you add a second access point, you need to go back to WPA.
Yeah, I don't know about that. That shouldn't be true. One thing I know is on modern equipment, WPA2 should be the best and fastest. WPA was just a temporary measure for old equipment. But either one of them is fine as far as security is concerned. In both cases, neither of them have any major cryptographic flaws. You had a question?
So WEP is correctable by software?
No, if you do correct it, it becomes WPA. Anything that is still WEP is completely unsafe. WEP can be cracked with zero knowledge of the key. It has mathematical flaws, so you can just send some frames, look at the response, and calculate the key from it without having any knowledge of the key. WPA is as safe as a password should be. If you choose an obvious password, people can find it by guessing the password, but if your password is not obvious, there's no way to get it.
Right, so people still operating without WEP, and they go in there with software and jam.
The only thing they can do is switch it to WPA.
But software corrected?
Yes, they can use, if your manufacturer does allow it, it is considered easy for the manufacturer to create a firmware upgrade that would turn it to WPA. However, there are plenty of devices that do not offer that, just because the manufacturer did not bother to do it. Yeah, but that was the reason why they invented it. The router manufacturers came up with a way to upgrade their old stuff to a newer standard. But unfortunately, a whole lot of stuff doesn't have the option, and that's why so many businesses clung to it for maybe 10 years later, because they had some kind of equipment in their store, like their cash registers or the scanners that the people are carrying around, that was WEP only. And they were unwilling to upgrade all that stuff.
I was at a shopping center yesterday and I picked up a couple of those WEP stuff.
They're still selling WEP stuff?
Well, no, I mean, picked up a signal.
Oh yeah, but people are still using it. That means they bought something 10 years ago that was WEP only and they don't want to upgrade it, and their manufacturer does not offer a software upgrade for free or something. It's just, yeah. So anyway, here's 802.11n was the next step up, and 802.11n is kind of crazy. It uses spatial channels. So if you have an 802.11n access point up there and a laptop here, it will bounce one signal off the wall and another off the ceiling and another off the floor and send different data through those channels. So in order to get full speed, you have to have multiple antennas at both ends. So it can actually have spatial resolution to tell what direction the signal is coming from. But the end result is you can get up to 300 megabits per second, and I think some people rate them up to 600. The next step is 802AC. This has wider bands and supposedly can go up to 1200 gigabits per second. It's not too cheap, not too expensive these days. That's the next big step forward. And it's included in the MacBook Air for several years now, 802.11ac, so if people actually buy those access points, you can get even faster wireless. And then there's AD. This is a big step forward. Until recently, all wireless devices had to run in either the 2.4 gigahertz or the 5 gigahertz channel, and that was because, in the first place, most of the wavelengths in the infrared, in the white radio spectrum are reserved for special things. They're already been allocated by the FCC legally for other purposes. There's only a few bands available for consumers. But the more desirable band up here at 60 gigahertz, and also there's one up around 100, I've heard, this was considered available and very useful because you can move a lot more data, but there was a hardware problem. Until a few years ago, there was no way to manufacture a semiconductor chip that can receive or generate those signals effectively. It was real expensive to pay for the radios. But there was a breakthrough, and they figured out how to make silicon radios that can easily generate and receive this data. So now this stuff is coming out, 802.11ad, and that should go up to like 7 megabits per second wireless, but typically very short range. So they're not actually talking about using it for Wi-Fi for laptops, but more like to connect the keyboard to the machine and the monitor to the screen and stuff, just to get rid of all these messy cables that you see me setting up every day up here. If it was 802.11ad, these short-range connections would all be wireless. So that's on the market now, but it's kind of specialized, and the main thing is to declutter your desk with it. It's not really a way to distribute information in a coffee house. And iPhone 8 will supposedly have support for it. Oh, is the iPhone 8 out yet? I think it isn't. We're still a 7, right? Yeah. Anyway, so there's a European standard like this called HyperLAN that is comparable to the 802.11, but not compatible. I know I helped one of my friends jailbreak her iPhone years ago because she was going back to Spain. And if you jailbreak your iPhone, you can then join a different carrier in Europe and connect. But some phones, you have to be very careful if you travel back and forth to Europe. A lot of people carry 2 phones. If you want to have one phone and be able to go back and forth to Europe, you have to switch the SIM card, and some hardware is not compatible with one or the other. It's a problem, just like our television signals are incompatible over there. If you take a VCR it used to be, you take a VCR to Britain, you can't record things because it's a different number of lines per frame. Anyway, 802.15 is the standard for short-range radio. It's called a personal area network. The most common application is Bluetooth to connect these headsets to your phone and other devices that are on your body. Bluetooth is, in principle, it could be a secure platform, and it can be used that way, but the most common use of it is for people to have these speakers in their ears to talk on the phone, and that is typically set to no encryption, and there is an association pin, a 4-digit pin you can type in to specify who's allowed to connect to your network, and on these devices that pin is hardwired to 0000, so there is no security at all, but it's all just miniaturized for convenience, and they accept no security. You can move data up to 2 megabits per second or even 24 megabits per second for the modern versions of the protocol. And the modern versions allow you to have encryption, which as far as I know is pretty good, strong encryption. And I know if you get a Bluetooth radio keyboard for your computer, and it's one of the modern encrypted ones, that is actually considered safer than connecting your keyboard with a wire, because electrical wires between the keyboard and the computer are antennas, and they emit radio as you type keys, and if you just put up a sensitive radio, you can tell everything anyone is typing by the radio emitted. But if you used a Bluetooth keyboard, it would be explicitly radio and explicitly encrypted, and they wouldn't be able to decrypt it.
Are you talking about retroflectors?
Retro reflectors?
Yeah.
I haven't heard the term.
It's like that.
Yeah, but I know there's a bunch of them. There was a demonstration like 6 years ago from a guy in a foreign country, Finland or something, where he took an antenna about this big and put it in one end of a long building and had someone sitting typing on a laptop, and he could get every keystroke from the antennas. And if that guy was using a Bluetooth keyboard, then there would be an encryption layer there, which would be some defense. This is what the military in America did with Tempest 20 years ago. They began to worry about people stealing our secrets, and they found out that if you had the old-fashioned monitors that are like the old TV sets with an electron beam and a vacuum tube, you can totally see every picture on the screen from the emitted radio waves, even a long distance away. And the only way to protect secrets is to have everyone working in like basements with no windows and metal all around them. Anyway, then there's WiMAX. WiMAX is a real political boondoggle. I owned a WiMAX phone for a while. WiMAX was a way, it was intended to distribute signals for a city, like cell phone towers, but for wireless. And there was a big rollout of WiMAX phones. They called it 4G, which was kind of wrong because it's not really as fast as 4G is supposed to be. And then Sprint bought Clear. Clear was distributing WiMAX, and then Sprint bought Clear, and Sprint actually told everyone not to worry. They were going to have 2 entire rollouts of incompatible radio frequencies through the whole country, which was obviously a lie, and they didn't do it. So I had a WiMAX phone, and it was 3G, and it was 4G for like 1 week when WiMAX rolled into San Francisco, and then they tore it down and threw it away, and it was 3G again, because WiMAX was like the beta VCR. It was a protocol that made no sense at all, because it came out right behind it, like 1 or 2 years behind in development, was LTE that was much faster. So there was no reason for WiMAX to exist at all, and that was an unanswerable question. So Sprint actually rolled out WiMAX and then abandoned it in 2016, and all the WiMAX rollouts were just turned off. And what really won was LTE. LTE is the new protocol which is going out. You see that pretty often in San Francisco now. And if you get a good LTE signal, it's really quite fast. As acronyms, I must say this is an acronym that makes no sense at all. It gives you absolutely no clue even that it's radio. But anyway, that's the one. Long-term evolution is the current standard that I think really has become the de facto 5G. So here's a summary of them. 802.11 is really old and slow. 802.11b was the first big hit. Then pretty much people switched to G. I had a few friends that said they actually rolled out 802.11a, and they said if you did, it was really nice because there's no interference. At that time, everything was on 2.4 gigahertz, and 802.11a was on 5, so you'd actually get clear signals without all your neighbors interfering for a while. But now 802.11n uses both, I think, and I think 802.11g and n are the only ones in common use these days, and 802.11ac is coming. Anyway, in 2013, this is kind of why the head of Microsoft, Ballmer, started throwing chairs around and swearing and freaking out, because they saw that Google was hiring operating system programmers, so they knew that Google was going to come after Microsoft to replace Windows with Android, and they saw that Microsoft was becoming completely obsolete because they never made it onto mobile devices. And the only thing they have are these heavy things plugged into the wall, and those things are pretty much like dinosaurs. They're getting cheaper and cheaper. Nobody really wants them. And it certainly happened. When I was 10 years ago, Microsoft was 99% of the desktop, and there were a bunch of people saying Unix should win, Unix is better. Well, Unix did win, but what did not win was free Unix. What won was proprietary Unix in the form of iOS. So here's what we have on the City College Network, even 4 years ago, is 25% iPhones, the rest Android, and Windows doesn't even make it up to 10%. Because there's no phones and no tablets that run Windows that are used by any significant number of people. The only people that have them are people with Windows laptops, and even those around here are mostly Macs. So, Microsoft increasingly becomes irrelevant, but they still have record profits from selling these things to businesses. So they're still making a ton of money, but they're no longer ubiquitous, and they're no longer controlling the trends of computing. They seem to be behind in everything. Everything they bring out is like an imitation of something that came out a few years earlier from Google or Apple. Anyway, you can sniff these things in monitor mode. Let me see if I can get this to work. It's a little tricky, but the Mac can do this. So they keep moving these esoteric fields around, but you can see these things on the Mac. I have to do capture, options. Okay, and this is where it gets a little tricky. I think it's per packet information. Yeah, I'm afraid my instructions are not 100% up to date. Let me give it a try or two. Per packet information is one thing, and here's monitor mode. That's what I want. Monitor mode means that my machine will listen to packets that are not addressed to me. Normally, your network card, every frame that comes in, it checks to make sure it's going to your MAC address, and if it isn't, it throws it away and does not pass it to higher levels. In wired cards, this is called promiscuous mode. On the Mac, it's called monitor mode. Let's see if this works. I think I'll see raw 802.11 if I do this. It's working. Okay, so now you're seeing the frames you normally don't see, like beacon frames and ARP frames going out. So here's beacon frames for CCSF Wireless, and you can see, like I said, because we support roaming, we emit these beacon frames, and they come out quite often. This one went at half of a millisecond. The next one is down here at 0.10 milliseconds, so something like 10 times per second. The access points around here, the many city college wireless networks, are sending out these beacon frames. Then if someone joins, there'll be join frame, and then there should be clear to send. Here we go. Like I say, so somebody wants to say something, they send a request to send, then they get a clear to send signal. Now they can send something, then they clear to send. Everybody in the room has to first say, shut up. Did everybody shut up? Okay, now I send my packet. Did you get it? Okay, now someone else can talk. And this whole arguing back and forth happens before each frame. It is a lot more overhead than you have on wired networks like Ethernet. So that's why you only get half of the bandwidth you should, because half of the real bandwidth available on the channel is spent arguing about who's going to talk next and saying if you got it. It's like two people trying to hold a conversation in a noisy party. What did you say? Say it again. Did you say this? No, you said that. That's what wireless networks are like. Anyway, so I think we're down to some iClickers. And come grab one if you need one. I think we got enough. I stole a few for another purpose, but I think there's enough left for the remaining population of the class. And there it is. Good. All right. So, get this thing to stop asking silly questions. All right. So what's CCSF Wi-Fi? I'll quit at 30. That's an old picture. That's probably from Windows 7 anyway. All right, that is the SSID, Service Set Identifier, the alphabetical name of your network included in every packet, every frame I should say, layer 2 is frames, so that all the devices can tell which network you are addressing. Since they are all talking on the same channel, it's not obvious who you're trying to talk to. All right. So which one goes at 600 megs? Gesundheit. Although, as I mentioned, this is the raw bit rate. The so-called good put is probably half of this, which is the actual amount of data you care about moving from point A to point B. I'll quit at 30. Okay, that's 802.11n. That went that fast. 600, yep. All right. And which one goes at 11 megs? Not all that popular anymore because this is a pretty unimpressive number by modern standards. Quitting at 30. All right, and that's 802.11b, the first really big hit in the marketplace. All right. Which one goes at 7,000 megs? quit at 30. All right, and that is AD, the fastest of all, but short range, and not really intended to be used for normal data transmissions. Which one only goes 10 meters? Now, wait a minute. Oh, that's true. Oh, all right. There is a right answer on the page. I'll quit at 30. I hadn't thought of it, but that's, of course, that's the limit for AD as well as Bluetooth. A went farther than that. AD is the one that's so short range that they really don't think it's going to be much good for moving data for computers.
What was the right answer?
AD, last one. That's the one and that should be back here. There's the AD, but it only goes 30 feet, like Bluetooth. So that's why it's not really for general purpose filling a room with wireless signals. Okay, so here, that was this one. We got one more, or maybe two more. Okay, which one is used for those telephone earpieces? When these first came out, I thought more students were insane than usual because people were running around talking to people that aren't there. And that's a pretty common sight in San Francisco, but they're usually a little scruffier looking. And it took a while to get used to those things. They seem to have fallen out of favor. I don't see people just using them constantly all day long like they did when they were new. A lot of students were just on the phone 24/7 for the first year or two. Anyway, that's 802.11.15, Bluetooth. One thing I learned the hard way is if you buy Bluetooth speakers to connect to your cell phone, they are different for Android and iPhones, which means one or the other of them is not obeying the standard, I think. It's very strange. Anyway, so how many non-overlapping channels are there in an 802.11g network? Quit at 30. All right, and that's three. Only three of them don't overlap, which is pretty rude. By the way, this is another thing you might want to do with Linux. If you replace the firmware in your router with Linux, you can move to channel 14, which is illegal in America, but legal in Europe, and it's another way to avoid all the interference. But if you just get a modern protocol like 802.11n and run it at 5 gigahertz, this problem is solved. 5 gigahertz has something like 40 or 100 channels that don't overlap. So this problem really doesn't matter that much unless you're using older wireless stuff. Anyway, we should take a break. What is it? Just about, we'll take a break till 10. Gives you about 7 minutes. Stretch your legs. I'll stop the recording. This is chapter 11.